So finally, we are going to
I will check it.
Sure.
3-day conference to the end, and that's presentation. And I just said to Patricia as well that whenever I book Summer's presentation and I know this 3-day conference, next conference, I'll put you guys in first, so you don't have to be nervous all the time. Because the other people enjoying the freedom for the last 2 days, right? Freedom. So, Ruzana, can you introduce yourself and what you do? What you, who you are?
I'm a lecturer, so PhD or post-PhD degree, university, Ruzana University. It's a Russian People Friendship University of Moscow, Russia. So I'm specialist in Indian philosophy. It is my scientific area, the basic, and but the second one is in Arab language, and so many years I've been learning Arabic as a professional translator, and also just history of philosophy, of course. So I try to put my interest into in the classical methodology of history of philosophy. And today I want to talk about translation and to share with you some results of my 5 years work in this field, based on translations from Sanskrit, from Arabic language, from German, and English. So, and very different philosophical authors. So, Arabic, Muslim mysticism, classical Indian philosophy, and contemporary religious hermeneutics, some authors, etc. And based on this very different experience of translation of various authors, I tried to analyze what I'm doing, what I was doing, and then I've made some investigation in linguistics, based on linguistical translation study, and then philosophical translation study. So first of all, when we talk about translation, we should differ the linguistic aspect and philosophical one. It's important if we want to understand what we are doing when we are translating, and it is important also because we should take into consideration this aspect if we want to make our translations better and more clear. So if we, linguistic translation studies develop some strategies according to the type of text under translation. It's important, and they propose some strategies.
Just a quick word. If you want us to move the PowerPoint, let us know. Or do you want the computer there so you can control, or you can tell him to move if you want.
Okay. Just okay. I will say it's not now. And the simplest strategy is the most famous is to keep unchangeable all terms in scientific text. The same is true for the philosophical terms, but the only problem will be how to find the most appropriate equivalent for philosophical terms, which will keep the original openness of them and will give our possibility to meditate on some philosophical realities. So there are some mostly, if we talk about linguistics aspects of translation studies, there are mostly technical problems. But as I understand, so my conclusion that there is no rules. We can recommend to each other how to make our translations more understandable, more readable, so more simple or more scientific, etc. Every scholar has autonomy to choose the technical ground for his or her translations, and of course he or she takes the responsibility of his or her choice. I mean the critics, I mean the readers or audience who will read it or not, will not read, etc. But if we take the philosophical translation studies, they arouse the more fundamental and deeper problem concerning the relation between a language and a thinking of or worldview. And there are many interesting theories which have no time even to mention, but all variety of them could be resulted in three main trends, which I called temporally universalistic approach. You can put
Universalist.
yes, here. That is. So, rooted in Aristotle or Hegel concepts, and in linguistic level, it will be Chomsky, Noam Chomsky. And there are three features which present this approach. Translation is transferring universal meaning and ideas from one language to another. There is a presumption of such an approach. Language is only instrument, and its function to find the most appropriate means to express these universal ideas or meanings or something that are common for every human being. And particular peculiarity or some specific features of the national philosophical tradition is something immaterial. So we can reject something that we consider or we estimate as non-philosophical because it's irrelevant to philosophical no problems, etc. The next one, I called it nominalistics just because I think that there is a Russian scholar. He is a specialist in Arabic philosophy, and he proposed the idea that Arabic philosophy is principally different from European and other philosophical tradition because of the logic of thinking, which is represented in Arabic language. As an example, he proposed that he says the Arabic language has the verb to be, like in English or French or Russian or Sanskrit, etc. Of course, there are possibility to translate from Arabic language into European language, and we will use the verb to be. But originally, the verb kana, it's an Arabic verb, means not to be, but occur. So something that is appearing at that moment. And even if we take the Quranic text, kun for yakun, be, and it's aroused, literally it must be translated occur, and it is occurring. So. But this approach says there are principal differences between procedures of thinking in various philosophical cultures, which are caused by grammatical peculiarities of language and can be traced in various levels of language. The language is understood in very wide. It can be also ornament or music or something that's related to this culture, and which is understood extremely wide. And the second is the ethical or axiological dimensions of such an approach are minimized practically up to zero. So I understand that you are principally different from me. So I'm Russian, you are Arab, or I'm French, you are Chinese, etc. And I understand that there is no universal ideas, universal values, universal, meaning, philosophical, I mean. So I agree. But I try to understand you. What's the logic structure you use? How you create the world view? And I have some external marks like language, like dance, like music, etc., etc. And I try to understand how you compose the elements, why, etc. And then when I understood it, I just see that as this scholar says, his name is Smirnov, he said that the common difference between Western culture, philosophical culture, and Arabic is that European philosophy is searching essences, so it's substantial. we ask always what is truth, what is beauty, what is etc. What. But if we take Arabic philosophical tradition, we will see that it's not about essences. Of course, there is a question about essence, but it's not central, it's not fundamental. The fundamental for this culture, philosophical culture, will be the question about the processes. So the processual character of this culture reflects also in the original philosophical tradition, not falsafa, which depends on European, but original. Of course, there is no correlation between two cultures. And when you translate Arabic philosophers or read some European translations which adopt it, it's not about Arabic philosophy, it's about your vision, because if you know Arabic language, if you live in this country, if you like Arab, so know inside it, you understand that the expression, simple, ordinary expression, for example, ana al-katib, I am a writer, can be translated different ways, and there is no equivalent to English. I mean, this English sentence, I am a writer. And so it's a very interesting question, but I'm not about that. Just I want to show that there is some, the ethical dimensions of such approach is minimized, and it means that if I know and I understood the principle of your living, of your thinking, and there is no restriction, there is no rules like technique. So it means that I can delete this culture, or I can organize the dialogue with this culture or with this text in such a manner that it will give a harm, so will harm you, this culture, because it's my profit. My profits is another kind. And the next one is hermeneutic approach. So it's a very
Symbolical.
Yes, symbolical. I underline something that I understood as a very important, very remarkable for. A translation shouldn't pursue an ideal translation, absolutely equivalent and adequate, and untranslatable things must be accepted. So you know this famous article and Paul Ricoeur, and there is a very reasonable idea that you should just find something that will transfer the same, not meaning, but expression of such a text. The core of translation is accordance without adequacy, language hospitality, hospitalité langagière. And this third one, taking into account the human realities of a philosopher under investigation, his culture and religious values. But inside of this, I will not talk about this because it's very famous and more. There are list of peculiarities of this approach. It's only a small part that I see as important. The next. That in the frame of the hermeneutical project we can create the methodology which I call situational hermeneutics. So integrated or complex investigation of the phenomena or realia of national philosophical tradition, which are usually rejected by a scholar as irrelevant to philosophy and as a result to philosophical text and interpretation. Intensification of the ethical dimension of scientific activity, involvement of the axiological point of view is the most meaningful for this study. What I mean, so of course, if we take nominalistic approach, it's a very fruitful, because we take a tradition as it is in reality. So we will try anyway, we will try. But if we take language, not, so if we take features of this tradition, not language or not on music, but more widely. For example, religious values or cultural tradition in which these texts were occurred. Then the scholar must or should see these texts or read these texts, taking into consideration some hidden values probably, or some hidden realia, which he or she, I will use not good verb, feel that they are important. Probably there is no textual, confirmation, textual proof that it is so, but his investigation will show. And can you? And there is a Sanskrit text. So nominalistic approach, just probably it will be more clear. If we take nominalistic approach, according it, there are two texts. So the first one, Kalidasa, Kaschit Kanta Garaha Gurunas, Lathikaret, Ramatah Shabena Stam Gamit, etc. And you can see there is a grammatical structure. Yakshir Chakre Vasatim. And the other words, everything is, we can put order according to the syntactical rules of Sanskrit. But these syntactical rules are understandable for every, if you didn't learn Sanskrit, you can understand. So I can see you that this is locative, so this is instrumentalis, etc., etc., and you can put order. If you take, it's a classical Sanskrit. If you take philosophical Sanskrit of 11th century, you can find some fragments only in philosophical scientific texts of this.
It is one word?
It's one word, yes. That is one word. So Sanskrit, late Sanskrit, has a possibility to use composite. In German we can create a compound, very, very complicated, but you never can use it as a sentence. It's just part of sentence. In Sanskrit, a compound can't be a sentence at the same time. And you can see there is a nominative, so there are minimum of grammatical features. Affix or suffix, And this
minimum of expressed syntax.
Yes.
What do they say?
It's from Vedartha Sangraka. It's a description of Brahman. So just there is a translation, but Later-
I see, I see. There's
later I
yeah,
will
yeah,
show
yeah,
you.
yeah. Okay.
So it doesn't matter. The matter is
There's the
that,
following point. Yeah.
yes, the matter is that this language has something that you should take into consideration when you are not only translate, but when you represent to the people who don't know Sanskrit. And there is a recommendation. When you translate Sanskrit text, you must, separate the stamps from each other, just to make clear. In my opinion, it deletes the specific of this language, because you cannot understand if you know Sanskrit very, brilliant. You have a great experience. You've read kilometers of commentaries in Sanskrit, etc. So very profi. But nevertheless, to translate it, you should know about what and how you can know. You should know the living tradition, how tradition is give interpretation to this text. Because there are possibility to cut stamps in different ways, and to organize the meaning of the sentence. Not so there is some nuance.
You see, this author didn't have the pretension to be very readily readable.
Yes,
This author.
but
Yeah.
it's not about the author. It's about the possibilities which language gives. That's important. And it's, of course, when we learn Sanskrit, we say that is we resolve this problem in such a sense, but we lose something that that is very specific for that tradition. That's because it what does it mean? It means that a thinker who thinks in Sanskrit has a more liberty in his worldview than me as a Russian thinker, Russian language or English language. So I can create like mosaic, one image or just put another. So it's very important, in my opinion, when we translate. And that's an example of nominalistic approach. This is Arabic text. وقال لي الوقف باب الرؤيا فمن كان بها رآني ومن رآني وقف ومن لم يرني لم يقف. هذا this text, 10th century, mystical text, Sufi. And of course, there is a very easy to translate if you know Arabic language. So there are grammar, form, verb, noun, etc., and grammatical, very, But there is another difficult. For example, if you take the word waqfa, the English translation is standing or position in silence, not moving, etc. But when you are translating the whole text, you understand that it's an incomplete translation, and you should translate it as a standing before. So it's it's important. And then waqfa, it is a masdar, adverbial noun.
Masdar.
So the noun.
So it is
which
a bit the equivalent of an infinitive as in German.
or gerundive.
Yes.
That's, you feel this processuality, which is not, for example, in Russian language when I'm translating. It's just a noun without, process, without allusion to do. And Arabic language has another problems, because there are amount of such nouns which has processual allusion into processes, activities. So it's a hidden activity, and that's also problem when you translate into the languages which haven't such a peculiarity. And but we can show how this method will work, not using linguistic peculiarities, but take something religious, for example, or cultural reality, which usually absolutely ignored by philosophers when they are investigating, for example, Indian philosophy.
You mean the situational hermeneutics?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And please let this is it's a very small text, but I will read. So if we take the system of Vedanta, one school of Vedanta, Vishishtadvaita, it's the Ramanuja whom I cited. There is a problem because many scholars said that it's a rather illogical system, and so there is no possibility to explain or systemize it in non-contradictory way. The basic idea is of this system is Sharira Shariri Bhava Sambandha. So this combination, word combination, describes the relationship between God and the world and souls. And this metaphorical description presents three different ontological entities which cannot be unified in other ways. So from logical point of view, it's contradictory. And they had to use some metaphorical images. And that's the problem. How to resolve it? Because there are some very important philosophical questions and decisions which are proposed by the Ramanuja, by Vishishtadvaitins. I'm, as a historian of Indian philosophy, I'm trying to understand why this image became key structure for this philosophical tradition. When we try to trace origins of this system, we see that there are two main traditions, Vedantic, so Orthodox Shruti tradition, and Vaishnava religious traditions, Alvars and Pancharatra traditions, which is not recognized by the Orthodox.
Sorry, may I translate this image? It is the image, it is the connection between the body and the
Yes.
owner of the body, Sharira Shariri Sambandha.
Yes. So
they try to explain
God is God
is the owner of the body.
animates the world as a body animates, as the soul animates the body. So that's a principal relation. But it's not philosophical, it's image. And we know that there are two very important cosmogonical hymns of Rig Veda, Nasadiya Sukta and Purusha Sukta. And you know, probably, if not, so Nasadiya Sukta is a very philosophical hymn which provides practically not the whole Indian philosophy, but most of schools of Indian philosophy by philosophical terms, by philosophical ideas, doctrines, etc. And it's interesting that Ramanuja and Vishishtadvaita tradition didn't use this hymn, which has a great philosophical potentiality, but use the hymn Purusha Sukta, which is describing the great sacrifice of Purusha. And please, can you put, that is Purusha, Sahasra Shirsha, Purusha, so Purusha, or universal human being, has thousands of heads, thousands of eyes, thousands of legs, hands, etc. And then he decided to sacrifice himself, and so thus the universe appeared, and etc. Can you? No. Okay. But anyways, just I will finish there are two facts from a geographical description of Ramanuja's life, which, in my opinion, help us to understand why Purusha Sukta played the key structure role, not Nasadiya Sukta, like in Advaita Vedanta, for example. But these geographical facts are ignored because they has no philosophical importance. They relevant to philosophical, background of this system, etc. The first is when Ramanuja was a disciple, and he tried to know the secret mantra which must be, key to the paradise, but nobody knows. Only devotee, initiated people know it. When he knew, the next day he went to the Vaishnava people and told them, that is secret mantra, recite it and save yourself. So he did something that broke the meaning of this tradition, secret tradition of initiation people. And the second is that Yamunacharya, his guru, was a Pancharatric tradition, this Vaishnava tradition. Until now, the Purusha Sukta plays their very important role at the initiation. And it's obvious, if we take into consideration these non-philosophical and shakeable facts of history, we understand why Vishishtadvaita was based mostly of Purusha Sukta and used Sharira Bhava image. Because the religious roots of this philosophical system were more so this philosophical system is rooted in religion, and it is the religion who dictates this philosophical system the basic images, and the most it's also about values. When you read philosophical text from Ramanuja, it's not about logical, it's about logical decision on logical problem or, these strict philosophical problems. It's about a devotee who tries to give a description of God in a philosophical manner. But we should remember that it is a Vaishnava devotee. And that's why when he talked about Brahman as an absolute reality, and then he said, so of course that it is a Brahman of Vedanta, but Vishnu is higher. So it's for historian of philosophy, for people who logically, very restricted. It's a rather, it's not about philosophy, but anyway. Ramanuja, who provides the history of Indian philosophy with the new religious turn, played a very important role, and we cannot ignore these facts. We should try to understand, and that's what about situational hermeneutics. So it's about that. So that's all.
Thank you so much. Questions? Andrew?
Well, to return to the beginning, well, it seems that the first universalistic approach is, to speak in plain terms, notorious. But the second is rather dangerous because we have in it no immanent foundation why these others are also human beings as we are. So it is quite natural to choose the third hermeneutical approach. But could you stress once more the specificity of the situational term, or the situation variant of the hermeneutical approach?
The word situation is it's important. So there is no universal approach how to investigate, for example, Asian philosophical text in general, or philosophical text in general. Of course, we can follow Windelband when he said, first of all, you should give a very detailed philological examination, then cultural, in what circumstances of life lived this philosopher, etc., and then give critics of his ideas, etc. But it's rather general. When you are in the middle of the investigation of a concrete philosophical tradition, the realia began to play a more important role than the ideas. So when we are talking about universalistic approach, it's not about critic or rejecting this approach. It works, but very districtly, so with limitation, limited. And sometimes we just mixed our European values with the common human, probably, values, and that's the problem, to discriminate them, to differ. And situational approach, it's dangerous, is that I can do everything, I can use everything if it helped me to understand more this person. And Paul Feyerabend, anything goes. That's the methodological approach. Something about that, like that. But I stress the ethical problems, because if you have sincerity, so you do it without hoping to have some profits, or academical careers, or to make image, etc. Just real pure interest. That will defend you from.
So do you think it's possible to approach these texts from academic context and it would be a violation?
I think that it goes violent or nolent, but we are going to such a situation.
So
because
cases
the discussions about technical problems, should we translate, should we transcribe, should we do that or that, it's without end. So there is endless discussion, and sometimes people will be tired about that. Anyway, so because everything is known already, so I've heard about that 1,000 times, etc. I know what will be end, and in my opinion,